Officially, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a great honor to be involved with the World Food Safety Day celebrations. World Food Safety Day takes place on the 7th of June, which is on Sunday, but it's not really possible for all of us to have a good time together on Sunday, what with us hopefully enjoying a weekend. And so with the help of the Department of Health, we decided to rather put together a whole week of celebrations in order to ensure that we make a proper celebration of this year's World Food Safety Day. I think you can agree that our minds have been very, very focused on the pandemic at hand. And it feels good to be able to talk about something other than coronavirus, even if it is just for a couple of hours. As we're all consumers, I think we all appreciate the fact that we have a right to safe and nutritious food. But although we have food safety controls in place, the WHO tells us that almost 1 in 10 people in the world fall ill after eating contaminated food. And this has a devastating effect on livelihoods. It has an impact on children being unable to learn and adults being unable to work. Although we have a very strong regulatory framework, it's not just the regulatory aspects that make sure that our food is safe. And we rely on public-private partnerships in order to do that. And really that's what today is all about, because I'm going to be discussing a number of public-private partnerships and how these work to keep you and I safe as South Africans. Where does World Food Safety Day come from? Well, on the 20th of December 2018, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution proclaiming a World Food Safety Day. And this is only the second time ever that we've actually had this day celebrated. And in terms of this year's World Food Safety Day, the theme is Food Safety, Everyone's Business. And the WHO has put out 5 calls to action in order to help us to understand what this actually means. And yesterday, we were fortunate enough to work with the Department of Health and the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications, and we discussed the first call to action, which is ensuring it's safe. The second call to action is growing it safe. And this has really got to do with agriculture and food producers adopting good practices. And that's really the focus of what we're going to be talking about today. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our speakers. As you can see, I have a whole panel of them today, and a good number of them are vets. And so we're going to be talking a lot about animal health. And then we have a very, very special guest all the way from Melbourne in Australia. That's it. And he has stayed up very late in order to chat to us about produce safety. And so we're going to be talking all things green with Dion Mahoney a little bit later in this presentation. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to share a couple of words and more perhaps on the integration between the producer and then going to the abattoir, if I may. And I know it's actually part of our discussion on Friday, but safe meat production is really an integrated approach. It deals with all levels of our red meat production chain and also with government. So I think, we all need to work together to make it work. There's not one golden bullet in this case. So what I want to share with you, I think here is the principle really that if we talk about microbiological status of our meat, the safety of our product, then we need to keep in mind that there are 3 very important aspects. It's the microbiological status of the animal that we receive. Then how successful are we at the abattoir in converting that animal to meat? And then all the temperature, time, and other conditions of storage and distribution. And as you well know, it's in the last case where the problems here with temperatures and handling is actually the problems happening with our consumers still that lead to food safety issues. But if we deal with the microbiological status of the animal at slaughter, I think we often tend to think about a healthy animal and a healthy animal being presented. And very often we forget that even in the case of an animal for even just dirty or is creating quite a severe risk for us at the abattoir in converting that animal. I don't have to remind you about listeriosis, where this was a particular issue. But the other aspect that is very often ignored when you talk about food safety is stress factors in the handling of the animal on the farm, in preparing to transport to animal to the abattoir, and during transport, and even in handling at the abattoir. As you all know, that with stress, with high stress levels, we do not have enough lactic acid. We have a high pH of a product. And although that high pH of meat does not at that stage directly relate to a food safety issue, we know that the ability for that product to last is not as good as an animal well cared for. So it's a very important aspect to keep in mind, is that we are dependent again on the producer to provide us with that animal. Right. If we talk about sampling and talk about residues, I just want to share a couple of thoughts on the residue side, and that is that it is the producer and the abattoir's responsibility then to make sure that the products, the animals, the carcasses, the meat that we present is free of residues. And this aspect is already included also in the correct use of the Declaration of Health that I will just refer to in the next slide for you. Right. Here you see just a summary of Dr. Malefe's program from the department side in terms of residues and the work that's being done just from the department side in a surveillance program to provide assurances as far as residue monitoring is concerned. You see a total of 2,500 samples that the department responsible for over the last year only, to make sure that we can provide some assurances to our local and also to our international clients with regard to residue monitoring. But I can also add to this by saying to you that in the last 2 years, we also have an additional feedlot program that has provided approximately 3,000 samples in addition to this to look for residues in our programs. It's interesting that the non-conformances are pretty similar in these two programs, but what we are requesting clients where positive samples are being identified is to provide us with full non-conformance reports on these issues. Keep in mind, this is a result that's available from 2 weeks to 2 months afterwards. But that doesn't prevent a producer or a feedlot to have a look at that batch of animals. Again, Peter referred to traceability. We cannot operate without a proper traceability program. In the case of feedlots, we can pinpoint that specific batch. We can look at the specific records for that batch of animals, and we can still correct operational problems at our feedlot and our producers to solve these problems. I'm going to try the next slide. Now, the Declaration of Health is another way of sharing the responsibility of a safe product. This came into effect in our 2004 regulations, where we basically are saying that we cannot expect of a meat inspector at a facility to do an inspection, ante-mortem and post-mortem inspection, and come to a conclusion without some assistance from the producer. So this is what we're expecting a producer to do, to provide us with full details of the date of delivery, where does it come from, the number of species, the health status, including the mortality rate on that farm, any medication given, as well as the withdrawal periods and dates of these products. So we are reliant on that information to be able to assure a safe product to our consumer. Do not expect a meat inspector in isolation to be able to provide those assurances. We have the next slide. Yep, I'm sharing this with you again just to illustrate the intricacy of our, in this case, meat safety monitoring system. And you'll see this divide between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health, where the moment a product leaves then the abattoir, then that responsibility for food safety becomes that of the Department of Health. And yeah, I'm glad to say that there are occasions where there is some interaction, good work between the departments, but yeah, at best, this is not the best scenario for a food safety or meat safety system. Next slide, please. To remind you that we did implement the meat inspection scheme in 2018 already. The reason for that scheme that was introduced by the department was to make sure that the meat inspection agencies that was currently providing this service, that they are registered with the national department. And so it's a national responsibility to make sure that there's recognition for the companies that appoint these inspectors, and not a matter of only the person being registered at each abattoir by the province. So there's now a national responsibility for meat inspection under the supervision of a veterinarian, which again is a step forward, you know, in providing food safety assurances. And yep, that is then indeed, you know, this is an integrated approach. We simply cannot try, you know, as individual organizations or as industry without government, and I believe as government without industry, we cannot make it work. This is a responsibility along the entire value chain with the assistance of the department.
Thank you very much, Gerhard.
Thank you.
Just a couple of things. The residue monitoring, won't you just kind of like spell that out a bit? I think, again, just, you know, this information is going to be shared on Facebook. What do you mean by residue monitoring for the sake of the average South African?
Well, obviously, in the normal operation on a farm and a feedlot, various products are being used to either treat disease or to prevent disease. And these products have different withdrawal periods. So just even within the same antibiotic range, let's talk about the simple example of using an antibiotic on an animal for pneumonia. Some of these products have a withdrawal period. You may not use it according to the registration of the product. You may not use it within 3 days after use of this product for human consumption. Sometimes milk up to 28 days, and we have some antibiotics that is, you know, you have a withdrawal period of up to 28 days. So there's a requirement, and that applies to your corticosteroids, beta antagonist, and all the different products. So for each of these products, the farmer must have a very specific program to ensure that he did follow this withdrawal period. And for that, he needs records on his farm. So what we are simply doing then with our residue monitoring program is to make sure that these prescriptions in terms of how to use a product is not abused by the farmer and or the feedlot, as it may be.
Gerhard, The second question relates to the meat inspection program. So again, just for the average South African, what you're saying about the meat inspection program is that the company, as well as the person that provides the meat inspection, so this is now once the animal has been slaughtered, that company and that individual are independent of the abattoir. In other words, they're not employed by the abattoir, so that we could be cooking the books, so to speak.
That's right. The requirement is that there are now certain companies that meet minimum requirements, that they are all appointed by the department, by the national department, and this company cannot choose one of these agencies to appoint. You also have the choice then, you need the permission of the department also to change from service provider, from the one service provider. So yes, this service provider is appointed and working independently. In terms of the scheme, and this service provider also have an open door to the department. In fact, the scheme provides for the fact that this service provider must actually on a monthly basis also report to the department on any non-conformances relating to, and this is important, it's not only relating to meat inspection, but also relating to regulatory non-compliance. So if there are any regulations that are being transgressed, it's the responsibility of the service provider to report this to the provincial department for follow-up actions.
Thanks, Gerhard. My last question, or comment rather, is that all of these controls that you've been talking about are for meat that is slaughtered within a registered abattoir. And I think the importance of knowing where your meat is coming from is paramount, because if you don't know where it's coming from, you can't rely on any of the controls that you or Dr. Molefe or Dr. Futvoort have actually spoken about. Am I correct?
That's absolutely correct. I think we have a tendency in South Africa just to assume that when we buy meat or get meat, that it is actually from a registered abattoir, which is not always the case. And yes, it's a question that the consumer must certainly always ask. Does this come from a registered abattoir, to be able to receive the assurances, that the abattoir will give the consumer?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gerhard. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for telling us about the processes that are involved with taking the cow to the carcass. Now we're going to a slightly different part of the cow, and I'm going to ask Dr. van Dijk to please join us as we talk about the Milk Producers Organization, and how we control the milk processing. Over to you, Dr. van Dijk.